I first of all want to thank all the participants for their contributions. The aim of this webinar was to provide the working class with an understanding of the crisis, of the nature of this disease, and how it can be fought, and to demonstrate that the pandemic is not a virus, or is not caused by a virus for which there is no conceivable response. In fact, and this is where the criminal element of the response becomes so clear, the cost in human lives is a product of willful policy. Very early on in the development of this pandemic, a columnist for the New York Times, excuse me, the most prominent columnist, Thomas Friedman, said, the solution to the crisis can't be worth the cost. I mean, the cost can't be greater than the cost of the disease itself, by which he simply meant that the economic consequences of shutdowns, lockdowns, all the measures of public health which are necessary to prevent the spread of the virus should not and cannot stand in the way of profit margins, the increase in individual wealth. All politics and all policy is in the end about social and class interests. The case for elimination, a path which ultimately leads to the eradication of the virus, but the case for elimination is so overwhelming from a scientific standpoint that it is hard even to grasp if one proceeds simply on the basis of what logic tells one. It is hard to understand how it could possibly be argued against. I said earlier in my discussions with Michael Baker, who has led and for more than 2 years has waged a heroic struggle against this pandemic, and all the colleagues with whom he works, and I know he is part of an international network of physicians, scientists, public health. He has demonstrated that this virus can be stopped. 28 people have died in New Zealand, and I know from my discussions with Michael that he wishes that this figure was even lower. But now, and we know from the experience of China, a country with 1.5 billion people, which has had as well only an infinitesimal fraction of the deaths which have occurred in the United States and all the other major capitalist countries, that the major cause of mass death has not been the virus working in the abstract, but the virus working in a very definite social and economic environment in which decisions were made not to take the measures which were necessary. Now, our aim was to review the science for there to be a clearer understanding of how this virus spreads, the significance of aerosols as opposed to droplets, how all talk of mitigation separated from a strategy of elimination is ineffective and in fact nothing more than an apology for so-called herd immunity. Moreover, it was our aim to demonstrate, and the scientists have shown this, that the policy of elimination cannot be regional, it cannot be national, it must be global. Now, I think it's easy enough at this point to identify the interests which block the implementation of elimination as strategy. There is an old saying that if geometric axioms impinged on material interests, an attempt would be made to refute them. And so we must ask, what are the material interests which block the implementation of policies which science has demonstrated are necessary? It's the interest of profit. It's the interest of private wealth accumulation. We can't get around the fact that we live in a society which hails the mindless, ridiculous, useless extravagance of a ruling elite which can't think of any other better way to use its money than to blast itself into space. That's not how resources should be used. All these resources ultimately come from the working class. And here we come to the other side of the equation. We know that there exist social forces which oppose the implementation of the necessary policies. What are the social forces in whose interests science works? Is there a class in society whose interests intersect with scientific truth? That class is the working class, the great mass of people. Now, if there's one critical change that has taken place since our last webinar on August 24th, and a cause for great encouragement, it is the fact that we're now beginning to see the working class move on a world scale. And there are many similarities in this situation to previous global crises. In its coverage of the pandemic, the World Socialist website has often made the comparison between the pandemic and World War I, the great catastrophe which erupted suddenly in the summer of 1914. To everyone's surprise, everyone thought this would rapidly be over. The boys would be back by Christmas. They weren't back by Christmas. The dying began in massive numbers, and it continued, not just for 1 year, not just for 2 years, but into the third year. And by that third year, popular opposition began to emerge. Strikes began to break out over the war, over social questions, over deteriorating economic conditions at home, and finally, in the most important events of all, in the Russian Revolution, which the great American radical Max Eastman described so well in the film From Tsar to Lenin as the beginning of the end of the World War. Now, the initiative taken by Lisa Diaz, the efforts made by workers in rank and file committees to take control of their own struggles and also to take control of the fight against the unsafe conditions in their factories and the schools is an indication of a profound change. Because in the end, if this pandemic is to be stopped, it will be stopped by the intervention of a social force which has a direct and pressing and urgent interest in ending it, and that's the working class. Now, the World Socialist website, Socialist Equality Party, the International Committee of the Fourth International with which it is affiliated, firmly believes that the working class has the power to bring about a change in this situation. It needs policies, it needs an understanding. This is the role, of course, that science plays. And again, I want to express my appreciation for all the scientists, those who are here with us today, and the many others working in the background who are trying desperately to come up with answers to this crisis. But in the final analysis, science cannot stand alone. It requires the support of a powerful social force, and that is the working class. Howard quite appropriately quoted from Engels. His close associate, of course, was Karl Marx, who famously wrote in the 11th thesis on Feuerbach, "The philosophers have only interpreted the world, though the point is to change it." Well, we can now say, paraphrasing those famous words, the scientists have explained the pandemic. They have shown how it is transmitted and how that transmission can be stopped. But the challenge of the working class is to end it. And so I would like to urge, as we conclude this event, that all those of you who want to become involved in this fight, please contact us. The address to which you may make contact, I believe, is on the screen. This fight must be carried forward on an international scale. Again, let me reiterate the point. This virus does not attack individuals. The evil genius of this virus, if one could, in a certain sense, attribute genius to what is, in fact, an unconscious biological process. But the character of this virus is that it attacks society. It depends not on infiltrating just an individual. It must spread through communities. And therefore, it can only be fought at the level of society, not at the level of the individual. And here again, the working class and its historical role finds the most acute expression. The working class is an international class. It acts socially. Its power is expressed not individually, but through collective action. And that collective action, that collective force must be brought to bear to bring an end to this pandemic, to stop the dying, and to change the conditions in society which allow such tragedies to occur. The pandemic, which we are now going through, is a powerful, powerful warning. It's not the only threat we face. Others lurk not all that far ahead in the future. Some are already in the process of development. Climate change, and of course, the ever-present and growing danger of war, to which so much of our global resources are directed uselessly, preparing for mass killing rather than for the development of society, the development of civilization, and the creation of a world in which we can all live in peace and brotherhood and friendship, concentrated on the future of our children and our grandchildren. Again, to all the scientists, public health, teachers, activists who participated, thank you very much. To all of you who are listening, watching this program, don't stand on the sidelines, get involved. This is a life and death struggle. The world we live in will not survive unless there is a fundamental reordering of society away from private wealth, the accumulation of private fortunes, anarchy in production. It is a fight for the future. It is a fight for socialism. Thank you very much. Good evening.